Snap. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Vinyl Night. I'm your host, Johnny C. Tonight's episode, his story, not his story, my story. And of course, I would like to give the shout out to the record selector by K-Tel. And of course, this is seen on TV. You can see this on TV. Thanks. So I guess I'd like to give a little bit of history on how I started collecting records. Um, it wasn't really a musical family per se. We did have a piano in the house, and my mother would play piano once in a great while, but that wasn't something that she did very often, once in a while. But I would have to say that probably the biggest influence on where I started listening to music, or maybe who introduced me to a lot of the music I started listening to when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, would have been my brother, who was 10 years older than I was. And of course, one of the first things that I remember listening to, excuse me for a minute while I dip down here, would have been the good old 45. And while we didn't have a whole lot of 45s in the house, this was probably the first thing that I started listening to, except a lot of the ones that I was listening to were children's records. Although we did have a certain amount of music on the 45s. One thing that I do recall is that we had some kind of maybe different choices. I remember singing along to Earl Grant, doing House of Bamboo. Um, of course, we still had things like Danny and the Juniors at the Hop. Chubby Checker, I remember singing along to Chubby Checker. Desmond Decker and the Aces, of all things, the Israelites. And it's almost kind of like, well, where did that come from? So there was a little bit of a varied mix, but as I said, my brother was the one that probably, thanks, introduced me to the music that I started to collect and listen to. He used to be a guitar player, so he was basically a folkie. But, during the early 60s, there was a lot of things that you couldn't get away from. But then there was things that came about, like the Kingsmen, Louie Louie. This is one of the records that was floating around in the house, and I certainly enjoyed singing along to Louie Louie. There was a lot of interesting tunes on here. I'm trying to think. Long Tall Texan. Oh, yeah. Used to sing along to that. I'm a Long Tall Texan. And there was a fair amount of instrumental kind of stuff on here, but I basically wore this record out listening to it. A fine record, though, nonetheless. Nice 60s garage rock. And of course, we all probably know the story about Louie Louie and not being able to decipher the lyrics and whether or not they're salacious or dirty or not. One of the other records that was around to listen to would have been the Righteous Brothers. And as seen on TV, by that TV on Shindig, I remember watching Shindig and Hullabaloo. I don't remember exactly seeing the Righteous Brothers on the program, but this was another record that would have been hanging around the house. And while I don't think this one might have been one of my favorite ones to listen to, it's still something that I would listen to. I'm trying to think of some of the songs on here. None of them are, I recognize some of the songs, but none of them really jump out at me as something that I was singing along with on a regular basis. Such as with Louie Louie and the Kingsmen. Since he was kind of a folkie, he played an acoustic guitar, and most of the friends that he hung around with were folkies that also played acoustic guitar. Another band, if you will, that was was around on album to listen to would have been Peter, Paul, and Mary. Uh, this one, album 1700, wasn't one of the originals, but hey, I paid 45 cents for that record. I figured I'm going to pick it up, get it. 45 cents. It was in halfway decent shape, so there we go. Album 1700. I dig rock and roll music. What the hell else was on here? Leaving on a Jet Plane. Oh, yeah, I used to sing along to that quite a bit. Yes. Album 1700, Peter, Paul, and Mary. Another one that I kind of found maybe semi-interesting that he picked up, but once again, being a folkie, he kind of also gravitated towards the blues a touch, and this would be one of them. Coffee House Music, Hot Tuna, Jorma Kaukonen, Jack Cassidy, which we know from the band Jefferson Airplane. This is a real nice record. I've got this one worn out. It's kind of in tough shape, but I used to listen to this one quite a bit. Dig it, man. You know, this is back when the artwork was artwork on these things, and of course we know they were went on to recruit Papa John Creech and went off into kind of a electric kind of a direction, but back in the starts, this is a nice acoustic album, Hot Tuna. Then, of course, oddly enough, some of the biggies from back in the time, such as the Rolling Stones, I believe this was the only Rolling Stones album that my brother had. And I don't recall listening to this record very much. I might have listened to it a little bit, but for some reason or another, I guess the Stones must have been that verboten band that you're not supposed to listen to. So I realize there are some pretty good songs on this, though. A lot of the earlier blues-based stuff before they really started writing their own music and competing with the other band from the era, of course, that we can't get away from. Thanks. And that would be, of course, the Beatles. And this is one band that my brother did have halfway decent collection of, and of course this one was one of them, and it's the second album. And I wore this thing out. I just wore this thing out. I would sing along to every song that was on this. Roll Over Beethoven, Money, Long Tall Sally, and of course She Loves You, Please Mr. Postman. And of course, when you have your Beatles records, you have to file it under the Beatles pop rock vocal group. And this one is it's a T2080. And while I won't be giving numbers for every record, sometimes for Beatles records, as some of you may know, collecting Beatles records can get down to a very minuscule fact about the record: mono, stereo, numbers. So that's the Beatles' second album. And that brings me to the first album that I actually bought all by myself. And no surprise, I guess. And that would be the Beatles' Let It Be. This record I bought all on my own. Back in the day, actually, it was this one and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Deja Vu, which I was familiar with somewhat from my brother's record collection. He had Crosby, Stills and Nash. So I was familiar with that style of music, and I picked it up along with this one. Um, and this one, if I can find my number on it, of course I didn't take it out of the plastic. AR34001 with the Bell Sound stamp on it, so we know it's not a counterfeit. And of course, back in the day, for some reason or another, every now and then I would do things like this. Thanks. Although at one time I kind of considered myself a little bit of a writer, and I had a nom de plume by the moniker of G. Willikers, and for some reason or another I stuffed this in the Let It Be album. This is called A Time Saver of Another Time, so that kind of gives you a little idea what was going on there. Hi gang, see the old tomato got squeezed to see if he was ripe. Yeah, all of you beatniks. Wild turkey from Greece, etc., etc. We won't go into the whole thing, but remember the time Dolores didn't believe that goldfish would never win a gold medal? Bingo. You got it. So, that's basically kind of an introduction to where I started with gathering records. Like I said, my brother was mostly a folkie, so I would find Tom Rush in his collection, and of course Dylan was in his collection, Tom Paxton, John Denver. So a lot of it was folky, and the rockier stuff, I guess, if you want to call it that, would be something that I would start finding out all by myself. And of course, every now and then, some of the older records I do like to reference. Just for the heck of it, just to get an idea on value. I'm not really concerned a whole lot about value, but this is certainly an older edition Goldmine record album price guide. But I like to thumb through it and see what they were worth. This is, like I said, an older one, so it's a little bit out of date by now, but just for some kind of a reference point, and maybe sometimes to find out if there's something super rare. I don't have anything really super rare in my collection. I'm mostly in it for the music because I'm a musician myself. I did start playing the guitar and the acoustic guitar that my brother had laying around. It was a Harmony 6-string. But eventually I got sucked into the bass because all of the other musician friends that were in the neighborhood wanted to be a guitar player, and there wasn't any bass player, so Johnny got stuck with the bass. So that's basically my story, part of his story. So I hope to see you with another edition next time of Vinyl Night. Until then, hasta la vista, or so long, or goodbye, or happy trails to you, whichever you prefer. Thanks.